The dead world of Epsilon Primis had been silent for over 10,000 years. Its surface was a patchwork of ancient scars and unnatural stillness, a reminder of humanity's forgotten wars. Towering, jagged mountains of glass and twisted alloys punctuated the horizon, remnants of a forgotten era. The air was thin like the last breath of a dying star, and the planet's surface, long thought abandoned, was now the final resting place of a once immense power. Now it was waking. On the bridge of the XSS Vanguard, Captain Elias Voss gripped the command console, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. He had seen strange things before, unfathomable things in the depths of space, but nothing like this. The moment the planet's seismic activity spiked, his gut clenched. "Callisto, run a full diagnostic," he ordered, trying to steady his voice. The Vanguard's AI, a cold and efficient presence, responded. "Seismic event detected, Captain, originating from coordinates 103.47 to 56. Energy readings increasing exponentially." Voss's heart rate quickened. His crew had been on this mission for weeks, cataloging ancient relics and uncovering old battlefields, nothing more than dust and rust. But this wasn't just a ruin, this wasn't something forgotten. On the screen, the surface of Epsilon Primis fractured in real time. The land groaned as something ancient stirred beneath it. Metallic structures, long buried, began to surface. Massive, jagged spires that tore through the landscape like the claws of a titan. They seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic hum. The ship's sensors detected bursts of energy, the likes of which hadn't been seen in this sector since the Ascendance War. Voss's second-in-command, Lieutenant Adrienne Kale, stood beside him, her face pale as the ship's monitors flickered in sync with the seismic activity. "Sir, those aren't ruins, that's a ship. A warship." She was right. The unmistakable shape of a colossal vessel was emerging from the planet's depths. The Vanguard's crew had come to uncover history, to trace the footsteps of humanity's lost empire, but now they had found something far more dangerous. Callisto's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, the object is humanity-derived. Hull composition matches patterns from the Ascendance War era. Estimated size, 15 kilometers in length, 8 kilometers in width. Power levels increasing to 88%, nearing full activation." "Activate." "The energy shielding," Voss barked, his mind racing. They were still 100 kilometers away from the object, but it was clear now that they had triggered something far beyond their expectations. This wasn't just some ancient artifact. It was a weapon that had lain dormant for millennia, waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. Voss's mind flashed back to the old legends. The Ascendance War, the final chapter in humanity's rise and fall. Humanity had once ruled the stars with an iron fist, unstoppable, untouchable. Then, without warning, they had vanished. Entire fleets wiped out in a single stroke. The Krell, the insectoid warlords of the galaxy, had claimed victory. Humanity was erased from the stars. But there were whispers that one day a single ship, a single weapon would return, the last vestiges of human power. And now, here it was, rising from the ashes of Epsilon Primis. As the immense vessel, its hull scarred by centuries of corrosion and battle, fully emerged, the Vanguard shuddered as if it were reacting to the ancient power being unleashed. Voss felt a coldness seep into his bones, as if the ship itself was alive, aware, and it was calling out to them. His crew was watching in stunned silence until Lieutenant Kale's voice cut through the tension. "Sir, the Krell fleet is entering the system. Multiple ships, several capital class. They're on an intercept course." Voss clenched his jaw. "Get us out of here, now!" But before the order could even be relayed, the alarm sounded, deep, reverberating, the kind that triggered a primal fear. The Vanguard's targeting systems lit up. "Captain, we're being hailed by the Krell. Their fleet is demanding we depart the system immediately. They are preparing to engage." Voss turned to the view screen, his knuckles white against the console. The Krell ships were massive, their black chitinous forms hovering in space, each ship bristling with weapons, stinger-like projectiles and pulse cannons capable of turning moons into rubble. They had destroyed entire civilizations with ease. And now they had found something. That might be more dangerous than they had imagined. Kyle's voice was tight with urgency. "Captain, we have no choice. We need to leave before they attack." Voss's thoughts raced. They had a weapon, humanity's weapon, but it wasn't activated. The Krell would slaughter them if they remained, but if they left now, they would never know what this ship was capable of. The hum beneath their feet grew louder. The massive vessel had powered up. Its lights flickered to life. A symbol appeared on its hull, an ancient crest that burned into the Vanguard's sensors. Immortal. Voss stared at it for a long moment. The galaxy had forgotten humanity, but this ship hadn't. "Callisto," he said, voice steady but laced with a quiet resolve, "send an activation signal." The AI hesitated for a fraction of a second, a quiet moment of uncertainty before it obeyed. A cascade of energy shot through the ship's massive frame. It echoed in the air, sending waves of power rippling through space. The power systems came online, and the Immortal roared to life. The ancient behemoth was awake. Voss watched in awe as the ship's immense cannons began to glow. They were older than anything the Vanguard had ever seen, yet they hummed with an energy so pure, so deadly, it sent a ripple through the entire fleet. The Krell ships hesitated, uncertain, caught off guard by this force that defied all logic. Voss's heart raced. Humanity's last weapon is awake. The galaxy was about to remember why it once feared them. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, Galactic War Stories is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you love epic sci-fi battles, deep space mysteries, and the untold stories of the cosmos, hit subscribe. It's free and it helps us grow this universe together. The Vanguard systems hummed as if responding to the Immortal's awakening. The air in the bridge felt charged, thick with anticipation. Voss's gaze was fixed on the view screen, where the shadow of the ancient warship loomed over the planet's surface like a sleeping titan. He could almost hear its silent call, a deep resonant thrum that vibrated through the very fabric of space itself. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, you need to see this." Lieutenant Kyle stood by the data console, her face drawn pale as she stared at the readouts. Voss approached, eyes scanning the information as it flickered on the display. "The Immortal isn't just coming online," Kyle said, voice tight. "Its weapon systems are charging, and it's broadcasting a signal." She trailed off as her fingers flew across the console, trying to decipher the code. "What's the signal?" Voss asked, though part of him already knew. The ancient weapon had been dormant for millennia, and now it was broadcasting humanity's legacy to the galaxy, perhaps even calling out to the very enemies who had once destroyed them. "It's a war protocol," Kyle said, her voice trembling slightly. "A message to anyone who dares approach. Come, face us or perish." She turned to face Voss, eyes wide. "This ship, it's not just a relic, it's a weaponized declaration." Voss processed her words slowly, trying to push past the adrenaline that had gripped him. The Krell fleet, still approaching, had to be feeling the same disquiet. If they recognized what the Immortal was, they would have no choice but to act. Destruction or surrender, there would be no middle ground. And even with their overwhelming numbers, the Krell were not stupid. Voss couldn't help but wonder if the Immortal was humanity's final message to the galaxy. A challenge, a warning, an invitation to return to the stage, but on humanity's terms. On the screen, the Krell fleet moved, their vessels close now. The massive ships, built of chitin and blackened metal, were ominous in their sheer number. Towering figures, their ships bristled with weapons, sleek yet terrifying. The insects that commanded them were a race as old as the stars themselves, fearsome, relentless and brutal. The last thing they wanted was an ancient human weapon coming online. Voss gripped the armrest of his chair. "Callisto, any response from the Krell?" The AI's voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. "Krell ships have halted their advance, Captain. They are assessing. None of their vessels are making direct moves yet, but they are preparing. The first wave of pulse disruptors has been activated. That was all the warning Voss needed. The Krell were testing the waters, trying to gauge whether the Immortal was truly what it appeared to be. But it wasn't just the Krell that would be watching. Get me a full analysis of their weaponry, Callisto, Voss ordered. We need to know what we're facing if it comes to that. The AI complied instantly, projecting a holographic map of the Krell fleet. Massive overlapping rings of pulse shields surrounded each ship, impressive defenses, but nothing that would stand up against what humanity had once crafted. The Immortals' ancient cannons began to pulse with a deep blue light, almost as if it were alive, awakening from a long slumber. The beams it was charging would be no ordinary weapons. They were the last remnants of humanity's technology, designed to rend through the most advanced alien defenses. The Immortals' designers had not just built a ship, they had built a weapon capable of obliterating entire fleets with a single shot. "We need to move now," Kyle said, stepping closer to Voss. Her voice was tight with concern. "The Krell are trying to figure out their next move. We have to take advantage of this window before they attack." Voss shook his head. "We can't. We need to see this through. We don't know how long this window will last." "Activate the Immortals' long-range sensors." Kyle shot him a sharp look. "Sir, if the Krell engage us, we'll be outnumbered, outgunned. The Vanguard was never designed to withstand a full-on assault from their fleet. We're not a warship. We're an exploration vessel." "I know what we are," Voss snapped, his voice low. "But we also have a weapon they can't possibly understand yet. That ship, if we can control it, could turn the tide of this entire conflict." Kyle bit her lip. She knew what Voss was suggesting. They had no guarantee of controlling the Immortal. It was ancient, powerful, and perhaps beyond their ability to wield. But as the Krell fleet loomed ever closer, the truth was undeniable. The fate of this encounter, of humanity's return to the galactic stage, hinged on their next decision. The Immortals' main reactor powered up and the hum intensified. The entire Vanguard shook, as if resonating with the energy being drawn from the planet's core. On the view screen, the ancient ship began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed. It was rising from the planet like a serpent coiling, out of the dirt, its hull catching the light of distant stars, reflecting 1,000 years of silence and waiting. But Voss's mind wasn't focused on the ship. His eyes darted to the incoming Krell fleet. It was clear now. This wasn't just a standoff, this was an invitation, a challenge, humanity's final challenge to the galaxy, a gamble they had placed on the edge of oblivion. "Send a message." "Send the Krell," Voss ordered. "Tell them we are immortal. Tell them to stand down." He turned to Kale, who seemed to hesitate for only a moment before she entered the command. Message sent. The moment the transmission was broadcast, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Every crew member watched the screens in silence, waiting for a response. The Krell fleet had stopped moving. The black ships loomed massive and silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the message returned. The Krell's reply was brief, sharp, and laced with venom. "You will die, human." Voss's lips twisted into a grim smile. "So be it. Prepare for battle." As the last words echoed through the bridge, the Immortal unleashed a pulse of energy so intense that it cracked the fabric of space itself. The first volley had begun, and the Vanguard was right in its wake. The galaxy was about to see the return of humanity's greatest weapon. The very fabric of space seemed to twist and shudder as the Immortal fired its first shot. The energy burst was so intense that the space around it bent, a ripple like a stone thrown into a pond, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The light from the beam surged outwards, engulfing the empty void before striking the nearest Krell vessel with the force of a collapsing star. The impact was nothing short of apocalyptic. The Krell warship exploded in a cloud of burning debris, a blinding flash of green and orange, lighting up the darkness of space. The shockwave sent tremors through the Vanguard, rattling the crew, though the ship's hull held strong. Voss's heart was pounding, his breath short as he watched the destruction unfold before him. It was a sight that he would never forget. Humanity's legacy, a weapon of unimaginable power, had just unleashed its fury. Kyle's voice cut through the tension, filled with both awe and disbelief. "Sir, they didn't even have time to react. One shot, and one of their largest ships, there's gone. The Immortal's main weapon, it's more powerful than anything we've ever seen." Voss didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the remaining Krell ships, who had been sent into disarray by the loss of their flagship. The Krell's response was swift, almost instinctive. Their ships regrouped, forming a defensive formation as their pulse cannons came online. The remaining Krell ships fired their first retaliatory volley, streams of fiery energy cutting through space, aimed directly at the vanguard. "Shields up, Callisto!" Voss barked. "Brace for impact!" The vanguard shuddered as the first wave of Krell fire slammed into its shields. The ship's energy fields crackled under the assault, shimmering like a fragile bubble under the weight of a storm. Voss gripped the armrest of his seat as another wave hit. More forceful this time, the ship groaning in protest. The vanguard was outclassed, outgunned, and yet it was still standing. Meanwhile, the Immortal, its ancient weapons recharged, was taking aim again. The ship's cannons, massive and gleaming, started to hum with energy, a bright, almost ethereal glow radiating from them. It was clear now that the Immortal wasn't just a weapon of destruction, it was a force, a herald of humanity's return, a blinding light in the galaxy's darkest corners. The Krell had no idea what they were about to face. Voss looked at Kyle, who was standing beside him, her face lit by the glowing energy displays. "Get us closer," he ordered. "We can't keep dodging their fire forever. We need to stay within range of the Immortal's firepower." A quick nod from Kyle, and she worked the controls, maneuvering the vanguard towards the massive ship. As they approached, the Immortal fired once more, this time a direct hit to the Krell's second-largest vessel. The sheer scale of the blast was almost impossible to comprehend. The Krell warship erupted in a ball of fire and fragmented debris, the shockwave sending the remaining ships spiraling out of formation. Voss watched in grim satisfaction. The Immortal was no longer just a weapon, it was a message. The galaxy would soon know that humanity had not vanished into history's forgotten pages. They had been waiting, lying in wait, their weapons forged in the crucible of war, ready to reassert their dominion. But the Krell weren't retreating. They were adapting. As their remaining fleet struggled to reorganize, they began firing their long-range weapons, massive pulses of energy lancing through space like threads of lightning. Each shot was a direct assault on the vanguard, but the vanguard wasn't the target. The Krell were aiming at the Immortal, trying to disable the ancient ship before it could unleash another volley. "Callisto, can you redirect energy to the Immortal's shields?" Voss asked urgently. "We need to keep them from disabling." Callisto's synthetic voice was calm, almost eerily so in the chaos of the moment. "Redirecting now, Captain. Additional energy is being supplied to the Immortal's hull." As if in response, the Immortal's shields flared to life, the energy fields around it rippling like the surface of a turbulent ocean. The Krell shots hit, and the Immortal shuddered slightly, but the shields held firm. For now the ancient ship was untouchable. The Krell were realizing something that had never occurred to them before. Their overwhelming numbers and advanced technology were no match for the brutal force of humanity's final weapon. Kale's voice broke through Voss's thoughts. "Sir, the Krell are preparing to launch their main assault. They're concentrating fire on the Immortal. They won't give up without a fight." Voss nodded. "Then we'll give them one." He turned to Callisto. "Activate secondary weapons. It's time to make them feel the weight of what we've brought." The Vanguard's weapons systems roared to life. The ship's secondary cannons, normally designed for defense and precision strikes, hummed with an eerie resonance. It wasn't the firepower of the Immortal, but it would be enough. Voss didn't need to obliterate the Krell fleet in one shot. He just needed to show them that humanity was back, and they would no longer bow to alien invaders. A volley of energy pulses erupted from the Vanguard's side, striking the lead Krell vessel in a blinding explosion of light. The ship's shields flickered for a moment before the blast broke through, and the Krell ship was torn apart in a cascade of flames and debris. Another ship followed, and another. The Krell were reeling now, their strategy in disarray. Their powerful warships were being whittled down, and no matter how many ships they threw at the Vanguard, the Immortal continued to tear through their defenses with devastating efficiency. But the Krell weren't finished yet. Their desperation was evident now. They had one final card to play, a massive, devastating assault. Their flagship, the Krell Dominance, had stayed out of the fray, holding back, waiting. Now, it was preparing to strike with everything it had. An overload of its energy core designed to obliterate the Immortal and anyone in its path. Voss's breath caught in his throat. If the Krell dominance detonated, it could destroy the Immortal and the Vanguard along with it. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a countdown to something far worse. "Callisto, can we disable their core?" Voss asked, urgency rising in his voice. "Negative," the AI replied coolly. "The Krell dominance's core is beyond our reach. Its overload is imminent." Voss stared at the countdown ticking down on the screen. The galaxy had just witnessed humanity's return, and now the greatest test of all was about to unfold. Would the Immortal survive its first battle? Would humanity's legacy be obliterated before it could take its first breath? "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Voss ordered, gripping the console with both hands. It was time for the final act. The Immortal had proven itself. Now it was up to Voss and his crew to ensure humanity's return would be marked by victory, not by oblivion. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the hum of the ship's engines and the distant, violent pulse of the battle. Voss's mind raced as the Krell dominance's countdown to overload neared its final moments. The gigantic alien flagship had gathered all its power, and its core was on the verge of detonating, a blast that could send ripples through the fabric of space itself. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a weapon of desperation, a last-ditch effort to erase humanity's resurgence from the stars. "Immortal, can you hear me?" Voss muttered under his breath, staring at the flashing countdown on the screen. It was a call to something far older than anything he could comprehend. But there was no time for hesitation. They were in the middle of the storm, and the only thing keeping humanity from total annihilation was the very ship that had been dormant for millennia. "Callisto," Voss barked, his voice tight with urgency. "Is there any way to override the Krell's energy overload? We need to stop them before they reach critical mass. They're about to fire." "The Immortal is already in range of the Krell dominance, Captain," Callisto replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The alien flagship is preparing to launch. If it succeeds, we'll lose everything." Kyle, still standing beside Voss, turned to him with wide eyes. "Sir, the Immortal is still powering up, but this ship doesn't know how to react to this type of threat. It's designed to destroy, not to defend itself from energy overloads." A cold realization gripped Voss's chest. Kyle was right. The Immortal wasn't equipped for this. It was a weapon designed for offense, not defense. Designed to bring destruction to enemies, not to prevent them from annihilating humanity's last hope. "Then we'll have to make it learn," Voss said, voice low, his thoughts racing. "We can't let the Immortal face this threat alone. If it dies, humanity dies with it. With the Krell core about to explode and the Immortal still slowly charging its weapons, time was running out. Voss had to think fast. There was only one option left. The Vanguard had to get closer, close enough to shield the Immortal from the blast. "Kale!" Voss shouted, his eyes fixed on the view screen as the countdown neared 0. "We need to intercept the core overload, get us between the Krell dominance and the Immortal now." Kale's hands flew over the controls, her face a mask of determination. "Aye, Captain, bringing us in on a collision course." The Vanguard surged forward, dodging blasts from the remaining Krell ships, cutting through the battlefield like a blade through water. The ship's engines roared as they pushed the limits of speed, but the Krell dominance was still far too close to the Immortal. The alien flagship was preparing to launch its final attack. As the Vanguard closed in, Voss could feel the raw power of the Immortal's cannons pulsing through the floor beneath his feet, the ship's weapons system charging in time with the pounding of his heart. He turned to Callisto. "Can you target the Krell flagship's core? We need to slow it down, anything to give us more time." Callisto responded instantly. "Targeting now. The Krell dominance is highly shielded, but I can attempt to disrupt its core's energy flow long enough to slow the detonation." The Vanguard fired, sending pulse bursts through the void. The first 2 shots hit the Krell dominance, but the shields absorbed them without much trouble. Voss didn't flinch. He had expected that. The alien flagship's shields were the most advanced in the galaxy, but there was a weakness. Its reactor core was far too unstable for long-term survival. It was a gamble, but there was no other choice. Kyle, take us closer, Voss ordered, his voice sharp. We're about to make history one way or another. They were close now, dangerously close. The Vanguard was within range of the Krell. Dominance, just within the reach of its massive, glowing core. Voss felt a jolt of cold fear as the countdown ticked down, then saw the enemy ship's main cannon power up. "Now, Callisto!" he shouted. In an instant, the Vanguard's auxiliary engines kicked in, and the ship veered sharply. Callisto's precision was unmatched as she guided the vessel directly into the path of the Krell Dominance's core overload. The maneuver was an insane one. Too close to escape, too close to stop. The Vanguard's hull groaned as they pushed the ship beyond its safe limits, and the shields flickered under the strain. A shockwave rocked the Vanguard, but they were already past the worst of it. The Immortal fired again, the beam cutting through the heart of the Krell Dominance. The immense ship shuddered, and the countdown began to stagger, a flicker of hope in the midst of utter chaos. Come on, Voss muttered to himself, watching as the massive ship began to break apart, its core destabilizing, but still holding on by the thinnest of threads. It was still dangerous, far too dangerous. The Immortal fired a final shot, and this time the Krell Dominance couldn't withstand it. The alien flagship's shields failed under the immense pressure, and the core overload detonated with the ferocity of a supernova. The explosion was deafening, a massive burst of energy that sent shockwaves across the battlefield, sending debris scattering through space like shattered glass. The entire star system seemed to tremble in the aftermath. Voss gripped the edge of his seat, staring at the colossal cloud of debris that had once been the Krell flagship. The explosion had been violent, but the Vanguard had made it through. They were alive. The Immortal was alive. Kyle let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We did it, sir. We survived." But Voss wasn't looking at her. He wasn't even looking at the devastation. His gaze was fixed on the view screen, where the remaining Krell fleet was scattering in the wake of their flagship's destruction. Some ships were fleeing while others drifted, their once formidable shields flickering. The Krell were broken. "Humanity is back," Voss said quietly, "and this galaxy will never be the same." But even as he spoke, there was a flicker of something else in the distance beyond the edge of the battlefield. A new force, a new power was emerging, a force that had been watching from the shadows, waiting. The first wave had been won, but this was far from over. Voss's eyes narrowed as the unknown vessels came into view. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The remnants of the Krell Dominance floated in space like a decaying carcass, surrounded by scattered debris and the faint glow of dying fire. Voss watched the screen with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The explosion had been larger than he could have ever anticipated, a blast so immense it had sent shockwaves throughout the surrounding system. The Krell fleet was broken, scattered like roaches in the wake of humanity's long-forgotten weapon. But even in the midst of the chaos, Voss's instincts told him that the battle was far from over. "Status report," he barked, his voice as sharp as the tense silence that had settled over the bridge of the Vanguard. Kale quickly turned from the console, her face pale but resolute. "We've taken minimal damage, Captain. Shields are at 70% and the Immortal is still fully operational. The remaining Krell ships are retreating, but they're broadcasting a signal, one we've never seen before." A cold shiver ran down Voss's spine. The Krell weren't just retreating, they were communicating something dangerous, and it was too organized to be a simple distress call. Voss knew that they weren't just trying to save themselves, they were preparing for something much worse. "Activate all scanning systems," Voss commanded, eyes locked on the view screen. "I want to know exactly what they're saying." As the crew scrambled to comply, the sensors picked up a transmission, a low-frequency signal that crackled with static. It was almost as if the transmission itself was too advanced for the system to comprehend. Voss listened intently, trying to decipher any pattern. Then it came. A chilling voice cut through the static, distorted but clear enough for Voss to hear the words, "We are the Orin. The Krell are our creation. You have no idea what you've unleashed." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Voss froze. The Krell had been the galaxy's greatest threat, a monstrous race of war-hungry conquerors. But now it seemed that they had been puppets in a larger game. a game with far deadlier players. Orin? Kale muttered, looking at Voss. Who are they? Voss felt his blood run cold. He had never heard of the Orin, at least not in any official records, but there was something about the way the transmission was sent, with such cold, calculated precision, that made Voss realize this was something ancient, something beyond even the Krell. Prepare for incoming ships, Voss said, his voice a low growl. I don't like this. We've made a powerful enemy today, but it seems we've caught the attention of something much worse. The Vanguard's sensors blinked red, signaling the approach of unknown vessels. This time they weren't just fleeing from the battlefield, they were coming straight at them. Voss's heart pounded in his chest. The energy signatures from the ships were off the charts, too high to be anything even remotely close to the Krell. Get us out of here, Kale, Voss ordered, his voice clipped with urgency. Now! Kale punched the throttle, pushing the Vanguard into high-speed maneuvers as the unknown ships closed in. But it was too late. The first wave of ships dropped out of warp space with unnerving precision, a dozen of them, sleek and black as the void itself, each one larger than anything the Krell had ever fielded. These ships, Kyle gasped, her eyes wide. They're not Krell. They don't look like anything we've seen before. Their technology, it's beyond anything in the known galaxy. Voss's gaze sharpened as the ships moved into formation, their movements perfectly coordinated, like an extension of a singular mind. These were no ordinary vessels. Each ship shimmered with an ethereal metallic sheen that made them seem almost alive. As they drew closer, their edges seemed to distort in the light of distant stars, like something that didn't belong in this reality. Hold tight, Voss muttered, his knuckles white on the armrests of his chair. Let's see what they want. The orange ships didn't waste any time. Their weapons powered up in eerie unison, and then, in a flash, they fired. The beams shot through space with a speed and precision that left no time for evasive maneuvers. The Vanguard's shields flared with a loud crack, the ship buckling under the intensity of the blast. Voss gritted his teeth as the hull groaned in protest. They were taking hits that shouldn't be possible for a ship of their class. These new attackers were playing by their own rules, and they weren't following the script. Shields holding at 40%, Callisto reported. We can't sustain much more of this. They're stronger than we anticipated. Kyle, engage evasive protocols. Get us under them now, Voss shouted, gripping his console. They were fighting against the clock. These ships weren't just powerful. They were engineered for total annihilation. On it, Kyle replied, her fingers dancing across the console. The Vanguard banked sharply, a sharp drop in altitude that sent them spiraling beneath the Orin vessels, narrowly avoiding another deadly beam of fire. The Vanguard's weapons roared in retaliation, but the Orin ships didn't even flinch. The Vanguard's energy beams simply bounced off their shimmering hulls, absorbed as if the ships themselves were alive, pulling the energy into themselves like a sponge. They're adapting to our firepower, Callisto reported with increasing concern. Every shot we take is being redirected into their systems. They're learning fast. Voss's thoughts raced. The Vanguard was powerful, but this enemy was something else entirely. They weren't just here to invade. They were here to dominate. Voss, we need to pull back, Kale said, her voice tense with fear. These ships are impossible. Voss's mind was spinning. The Immortal was their ultimate weapon, their ace in the hole, but it couldn't engage yet, not without risking being overwhelmed. The Vanguard was the only thing keeping the Orin at bay, but with their overwhelming firepower and rapid adaptability, it wouldn't be enough for long. Suddenly, a loud, metallic screech echoed through the Vanguard. The bridge lights flickered as the ship lurched under another devastating blow. The orange ships were closing in, preparing for the final strike. Voss turned to his crew, a fierce fire igniting in his eyes. We're not running, we're not backing down. His voice was a growl, filled with the fury of humanity's will to survive. This is our galaxy. We fought to get here, and we'll fight to keep it. He turned back to the view screen, watching the approaching Orin fleet, now mere moments from delivering the fatal blow. Full speed ahead, Kyle. We'll make them earn this. And with that, the Vanguard shot forward into the storm, the heart of humanity's fight for survival now just beginning. The Vanguard tore through space like a comet, its engines screaming as the crew pushed the ship to its absolute limits. Voss's grip tightened around the command chair, every fiber of his being focused on the oncoming storm of orange ships closing in. They were everywhere, surrounding them on all sides, their black, living hulls glinting like shadows in the cold void. Every minute they held their ground felt like an eternity, and the odds of survival grew slimmer with every passing second. "Captain, they're on all sides now. We can't escape. There's nowhere to run," Cale shouted over the roar of the ship's systems. Her face was a mixture of determination and dread. She knew they were close to the breaking point. Voss didn't flinch. He had fought for this galaxy, bled for it. There was no turning back now. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, any way to tip the scales in their favor. But the Orin were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They didn't just want to conquer, they wanted to consume. "They're adapting faster than we can react," Callisto reported, her eyes glued to the sensor screen. "Our weapons, our shields, are ineffective. We're not even leaving a scratch." Voss's gaze never left the approaching fleet, his thoughts cold and calculating. Then something stirred deep in his gut. A spark of hope. He turned sharply toward Callisto. "Wait, what did you say about their adaptability?" he asked. His mind was working through the data, forming a pattern, a possibility. "They're learning from our attacks," she replied. "Each shot we fire seems to make them stronger. They're evolving." Voss's heart skipped a beat. That was it. The key. The orange ships were feeding off their energy, adapting to their tactics, but they were doing it too quickly. It wasn't just their technology at work. It was something deeper, something that could be exploited. He turned to Cale. "Cale, get me a direct line to the Immortal, now." "Sir?" Cale's brow furrowed in confusion. "Just do it," Voss snapped, his voice urgent. The comms pinged with a connection, and soon Voss heard the familiar, haunting hum of the Immortal's artificial intelligence. It had been silent during the battle, waiting, calculating. Now, however, Voss needed it more than ever. "Immortal," he said, his voice tight with focus. "I need you to reverse the power flow, overload your weapons, feed them into the enemy ships, drain their power, their energy, force them to adapt in a way they're not ready for." The AI paused for a fraction of a second, as if processing the enormity of the request. The deep, resonant voice of Immortal came through, cold and precise. Command acknowledged. "Reversing power flow. Beginning discharge." Voss's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the Immortals slowly power up in the distance. The Orin, ships still closing in, hadn't yet realized the trap. They were too focused on the Vanguard, which had become a target of their relentless pursuit. The Immortal's cannons began to glow with a strange, eerie light as its systems hummed to life, drawing power from the ship's core in ways never intended. "We don't have much time, Voss," Kyle warned, her hands shaking as she navigated through the enemy fire. "The Immortal is still too far to engage effectively. We need to pull them away from it." Voss's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. There was no room for second-guessing. They had one chance at this, and it was all or nothing. "Cale, take us in," he commanded. "We're going in for the kill." The Vanguard's engines roared to life, and they surged toward the center of the Orin fleet, right where the Immortal was slowly positioning itself. The Orin ships didn't react immediately. They had already marked the Vanguard as the target, still unaware of the shift in strategy. "Callisto," Voss said, his voice steel, "prepare to overload the Vanguard's weapons. We need to make them think we're taking them head-on. I want everything we've got, everything." Callisto hesitated for just a moment before replying. "Understood. Weapons are primed. On your mark." Voss glanced at the clock. He could feel the pulse of the Immortal's energy rising, its power building like a tidal wave. "Now, Callisto, fire everything." The Vanguard opened fire with every weapon in its arsenal, lasers, pulse cannons, and plasma turrets, all aimed at the heart of the Orin fleet. The explosion of energy was enough to shake the ship, the blasts leaving the Orin ships disoriented as they scrambled to adjust their shields. But they couldn't react fast enough. The Vanguard had become a blinding beacon of destruction, forcing the Orin fleet into a chaotic defensive maneuver. But Voss's true plan was already in motion. He could feel the ground beneath him vibrating as the Immortal's energy began to surge into the Orin ships. The energy flow was reversed, a dangerous gambit, but it was starting to work. The orange ships, so used to adapting and absorbing, began to flicker, their shields sputtering, their power cores struggling to keep up. In that moment, the Immortal unleashed its deadly salvo. The Vanguard held its course, the explosions blinding, and the orange ships buckled under the sheer intensity of the combined assault. The strange, ethereal ships began to collapse in on themselves, unable to handle the raw power being drained from them. It wasn't just an attack, it was an internal collapse. The Orin had tried to absorb everything the Vanguard and Immortal threw at them, but they had underestimated the true power of humanity's hidden weapon. Voss watched, mesmerized, as the once feared Orin fleet was torn apart. The Immortal was a force unlike anything the galaxy had seen, and as it fired again, the last remnants of the orange ships vanished in a final, violent flash. The battle was over. For a long moment there was silence. The Vanguard floated in space, the remnants of the enemy fleet drifting like lifeless husks. The Immortal stood victorious, its weapons still glowing with residual energy. Humanity had won, but the cost had been immense. Voss exhaled slowly, his body still tense with adrenaline. He glanced around at his crew, each of them breathing a sigh of relief. They had survived the impossible. They had faced the unknown and emerged victorious. But Voss knew one truth now, one that had been etched into his soul. This victory was just the beginning. The galaxy had seen humanity's power, and there would be those who would want to challenge it. Others would come faster, stronger, more cunning. Set a course for the nearest colony, Voss said, his voice steady once more. We've made our mark. Now we prepare for the next battle. And as the Vanguard slowly turned, the stars stretching before them, one thing was certain, humanity's fight had only just begun. The galaxy would tremble. That's the end of the story. What did you think? Feel free to like, share, and comment below. Let us know if you want more epic sci-fi adventures like this. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.